The Delivering Health podcast gives you a fresh perspective on the age-old question, why do I feel like crap and what can I do about it? I'm Dr. John Neustadt. I cut through the confusion of alternative medicine's promises, conventional medicine's failures, fad diets, and dietary supplement hype to help you unlock your full health potential. This next guest is going to be one that you want to stop whatever you're doing and listen to and probably take some notes on, because I saw her talk recently at a medical conference and I was typing away furiously notes and just was blown away by not only her level of research knowledge and clinical knowledge, but the way that she could convey practical, realistic things that people can do to stop and reverse Alzheimer's disease. And anybody who has a family member with Alzheimer's disease and it runs in my family knows just how devastating that is, not only for the individual who has it, but the entire family. Well, Dr. Heather Sandison has devoted her career to helping people battling dementia. Not only has she developed unique and successful strategies for patients and caregivers through her clinical, residential, and her clinical and residential work, but also her research. She has a published clinical trial showing improvement in Alzheimer's disease patients with her approach. She's also written a new book called Reversing Alzheimer's, and it shows you what you can do and walks you through the process of how you can take control. So Heather, thanks for being here. I'm excited to dive in with you.
John, such a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
So how did you, I love people's backstories a little bit. How did you get into this? Why Alzheimer's disease and dementia?
Yeah, I'd heard over and over again in training that there was nothing you could do to support someone with dementia, that was an irreversible disease process. And it was just this long goodbye. And to suggest that we could do something as naturopaths to help was to give people false hope. And I heard that over and over again. We hear that from the media. We had heard that from neurology. I heard it from instructors, all well-meaning and well-educated. And yet then I heard from Dr. Dale Bredesen, my mentor, when I was at a medical conference, that wasn't true, that there were people who had reversed their cognitive decline, who were either on their way towards Alzheimer's or diagnosed with Alzheimer's, who were able to improve. And although I was skeptical, the way he delivered it, it made sense to me. He was essentially saying, if you stack all of the interventions that we learn in naturopathic school, and instead of, we will sometimes say, meet the patient where they're at, or be mindful of how much you're asking them to do. Don't overwhelm them. And you don't want them taking too many supplements. So we kind of talk ourselves out of really fully delivering the full platter of options and things that you can do to improve health. And he was saying, if you stack all these things and do them all, you get benefit. If we're systematic about how we apply this naturopathic approach, this functional medicine approach, then we often will see really positive and amazing, miraculous outcomes.
And you've seen those, I'm assuming, in your clinic and with your patients. Before the clinical trial, before the book came out, you've been seeing these improvements over and over in your own patients.
Exactly. So John, after I was trained by Dr. Bredesen, so I went to his workshop, his weekend-long workshop, skeptical, but like, all right, there's something to this. He's saying this can work. And also with the idea that, gosh, if I could treat people with Alzheimer's, the rest is easy, right? The rest is cake. So why not? Why not give it a shot? And then came back after that weekend workshop feeling, again, pretty skeptical. But then I watched over and over again, people even with severe dementia getting better. Now, it's much harder to reverse the disease process when people are older. There's structural changes. There's the buildup of the plaques and the tangles, and there's a lot of degenerative disease that's taken place in the brain. And getting better from that is a huge lift. It does not happen every time. It's very challenging. It requires a lot of time and effort and resources on the part of the caregiver and the patient. And it's challenging. So what we really want to do is get people earlier on. And I think one of the frustrating things about this and why there's such a need is because people had heard that story. People still are hearing the story that I had, that there's nothing you can do. So they delay going to the doctor. They delay getting treatment because they don't think that there's help. I can't tell you how many patients I've had who say, we went to the neurologist, our primary care sent us to neurology, or I was worried, so I asked for an appointment with neurology. They gave us a couple medications. They said they don't work very well. They took away my driver's license and they told me to get my affairs in order and they would measure the decline in 6 or 12 months. That is not a message of hope. It's not an empowering message. It's basically goodbye and good luck.
And not only that, though, it is a message that what I'm hearing you say and what I saw in your medical talk, it's a message that's not really founded in research or science, and it's not true or accurate. So let's
It's
walk
factually
people
inaccurate.
through. You talked about, I think, 6 domains. And I think a lot of people think it's, oh, it's just genetic. There's nothing I can do. That's just one small piece of a much larger puzzle. Some risk factors you can't change, but others people have a tremendous amount of control over. So can you just walk people through those ideas a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have modifiable risk factors and unmodifiable risk factors. I cannot change the year you were born, and age is a risk factor. I cannot change whether you were born male or female, and being female is a risk factor. I cannot change the genetics that your parents gave you. And ApoE, there was actually a Nature paper that was published just in the last week that suggested that ApoE44 is a cause. It's a genetic cause of disease. And we put this in our structure category. They suggested that people who over 65 with ApoE44, which is about 2% of the population, that they are 75% of people 65 and older with those genetics have enough amyloid to be diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So there's almost an inevitability that they're suggesting. They hedge that a little bit, but this
But
for
to be
me,
clear, because I in conversations with patients all the time, when they hear percentages and numbers, they tend to focus on the scariest one, 95%, or what do you say, 75% of patients with ApoE44 are going to get it. But what you also said is 98% of people don't have that gene, don't
yes.
have that.
And for a long time, people are like, why would I even test this? Because there's nothing I can do. And that's the part that needs to change. There's actually so much that we can do. And that's where it gets a little bit overwhelming, even. And what I would love to share with your listeners today is a structure for how to not get overwhelmed and how to take this piece by piece and really put into a context, a framework. How do I know for me what might be driving cognitive decline so that I can make the decisions that are going to have the biggest impact in my brain, in my body, to optimize my cognitive function, whether I'm 25 or 75 or 95, right?
I love it. Let's walk us through that then.
Okay, so when we think about a complex system like the brain, we want to think through the imbalances. What are the things that are too much, too little, in the wrong place, or at the wrong time? And what things are going to drive a disease process? So, what we want in the brain is a homeodynamic state, right? We want things are going to be changing. They're going to be coming and going. It's going to be daytime, nighttime. We're going to be exercising. We're going to be sleeping. And we want the ability to basically have resilience for the stressors that are going to come up day to day. So, at a causal level, what are the things that, if there is an imbalance there, it's going to cause disease, toxins, nutrients, infections, stressors, structural issues, and signaling? When those primary drivers are out of balance, again, toxins, nutrients, stressors, structure, infections, and signaling, and we can go into each of them. When those are out of balance, we are going to have a disease state. Now, it might manifest differently for different people, maybe cancer for one person, dementia for another person, MS or ALS for another person. But when we can look at those systematically for each individual from a naturopathic perspective, we're looking at the root cause. And when we resolve them, we clear up inflammation, we clear up in hormonal imbalance, we clear up all of these other kind of secondary issues that many people will point to and say, oh, the cause is inflammation. But we're like, no, why? Or the cause is beta amyloid plaque. Why? What triggered that? That's what's really interesting to us and where we see a reversal in the neurodegenerative process.
And you're saying with the beta amyloid plaques building up, though, originally, if my memory is correct, that was thought to be the causative factor. And there's there was really nothing else. But that's only one piece of a much larger puzzle.
Absolutely. So what we saw was essentially, if you weren't the amyloid mafia, there's like a term for all of this. There's a great book by a gentleman named Carl Harup called How Not to Study a Disease: The Story of Alzheimer's. And essentially, it for a decade or more, if you were not studying amyloid, you were not studying Alzheimer's. And yet, what we have learned about amyloid is that when you get rid of it, sometimes cognitive dysfunction increases. You get worsening cognitive function when you get rid of the beta amyloid. What does beta amyloid do? It's antimicrobial. It's actually there to protect us. And so what we want to do is go upstream. That's like you're looking downstream. You're looking at a cause. You're looking at the effect, not the cause, when you're looking at beta amyloid. So it can indicate how far along the pathophysiology has progressed. However, that's certainly related to Alzheimer's. But if we go upstream and say, okay, what pulled the trigger? That's what's super fascinating and where we can start to get resolution and better cellular function.
And it's not just one trigger, it's multiple triggers are being pulled. It's similar to all chronic diseases that I know. It doesn't come down to one single cause, it's multiple insults happening over decades from various angles. Various different things are happening. And you, in your work and your talk, you talked about the connection between cardiovascular disease and Alzheimer's disease. There's lots of different types of dementia, Alzheimer's being just one of them. But talk about this connection, because people understand heart disease as a killer. And I think they've heard over and over how exercise and diet, it can impact heart disease. And what you're saying is the research is showing that essentially there is a connection, there are commonalities between cardiovascular disease and Alzheimer's disease, and there are similar things you can do for both that helps both.
Yes, absolutely. Very well said. So when we look at the cardiovascular picture, right, it comes back to toxins. Toxins are going to drive inflammation in the vasculature, right? So the spasming and issues with getting blood flow around. When we talk about the cardiovascular system, what are we talking about? I said this over and over again in my talk. It's plumbing. It's essentially plumbing. And what we're most concerned about is that plumbing clogged or is a pipe burst, right? That's a hemorrhagic stroke, is a burst pipe. Clogged plumbing can be an ischemic stroke or the clogging of arteries, atherosclerotic plaques. And if those things are happening, we're not delivering what's in the blood, right? Oxygen, nutrients, and that is going to cause a big problem. And so what happens with toxins is that can impact the integrity of the vascular wall and lead to clogged plumbing or inflamed, and also inflammatory markers can go up, inflammatory cytokines, and that can affect the brain, but also the heart. So we see these commonalities throughout each of these sections where the causal level toxins are going to increase risk of cardiovascular disease and also cognitive dysfunction. Nutrients, this is a really, really big one, right? Cholesterol, but not just dietary cholesterol, calcium, cardiac calcium scores, all of these things that are going to impact that plumbing, the clogging of the arteries, so that the question becomes, can you get blood flow to the brain so that your brain can get the nutrients and the oxygen that it needs to survive? So with nutrients, a heart healthy diet and a brain healthy diet have a ton of overlap. Low in processed foods, if not completely eliminated, high in veggies, all of the nutrients that our brain needs to work, that we need for mitochondrial function, that we need for glucose regulation in particular. We know that high levels of sugar or glycotoxicity can create issues in the brain. We sometimes will colloquially call Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes. So we have caramelization of the cells. We also have insulin resistance. So we're having trouble making enough energy in the brain. The brain uses 20% of the energy that we expend every
Wow.
day. It only takes up 2% of our body weight. It's a very, very hungry organ, and we need to deliver fuel to it. And if we're delivering sugar, but it's not turning into ATP, we have a resource deficiency. And so one of the answers to that is to switch to ketosis and actually burn fat for fuel. And we can do this in a very heart healthy way. We actually see triglycerides come down. We see HDLs go up. We see a balancing of our cardiovascular markers when we can get into a healthy ketogenic state. So there's lots to consider. in that nutrient level, from that nutrient level perspective. Homocysteine is another one, or methylation status. So we know that high levels of homocysteine both contribute to cardiac inflammation, but they also contribute to brain atrophy directly. So making sure we have enough nutrients on board, including methyl B12, B9 or folate, methylfolate, and B6, really important to bring down those homocysteine numbers into it. We usually want them right around 7, 8 to be ideal for brain health and heart health. So there's so many directions we can go here. We can just go through the causal level pieces and connect up to the heart. But you tell me, John, what direction do you want to go?
Well, I like to give people practical ways of thinking about things that they can put into practice, talk to their doctors about, find more information about. We could, of course, go into the pathophysiology, and my brain's kind of going off as you're talking. I'm thinking of all these things like, chronic stress shrinks brain volume, and all of these different insults that people can have. But if you were to come in, if I were to come into you as a patient with the diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, or concerned about Alzheimer's disease running in my family, or maybe I've got already mild cognitive impairment. I don't know if your approaches would be different in each one of those, but help people understand how they can think about these things, maybe questions to start asking where they can see a hopeful pathway based on the science of actions that can be taken, that they'll be able to conceptually to improve their brain health and their memory.
So going back to the ApoE status, so ApoE status, if you get one from mom, one from dad, and so if you're in prevention category, you know that you have one copy of ApoE4, so you're in that 30% chance of developing dementia in your lifetime. Or if you've got two copies, if you're in that 2% of the population that's ApoE44 and you have this greater than 50% risk of developing Alzheimer's, you need to work harder than your spouse, than your neighbor, right? We've got more prevention to do. And if we're armed with that from our 20s, if we know we've got to have a brain healthy diet and keep up the exercise, I hope that that is really empowering. We can delay the onset or prevent it from ever happening. Dr. Bredesen, he talks about doing a cognoscopy for everybody over 45. So just like we go and get a colonoscopy to see if we have a risk of colon cancer, you would look at your brain and you would go through these systematically. You would say, are there toxins that are putting me at risk? Are there nutrient deficiencies or imbalances that are putting me at risk? Are there structural issues that might be putting me at risk, like a traumatic brain injury or sleep apnea or cardiovascular risk? Through the plumbing issues? Or is there a stress issue? Am I not getting enough sleep, or am I under too much pressure, too much stress? And do I have the engagement? Do I have the purpose and meaning in my life? Do I have the great relationships? Do I have a stress management practice, right? Are those things in place? What about infections? Do I have P. gingivalis or COVID or Lyme spirochetes or herpes that might be impacting directly my brain and turning on that amyloid plaque generation? What about signaling? Postmenopausal women, are we getting the messages to our brain from a hormonal perspective to keep going with neurogeneration and synaptogenesis, that connection between them? So if we're in that luxury spot of prevention mode, we want to do this. We want to do this once, between 45 and 50. And especially if we know we have that genetic risk, we want to do it earlier. Now, if we are already noticing signs, we need to be more proactive. We know that the earlier we catch this, the easier it is, the less resources, the less of everything, the less time, effort, money, energy it takes to reverse the process and get improvements. So in those earlier stages of decline, where it's more subjective, I'm losing my keys, I don't remember the neighbor's name, those kinds of things are happening, even though they wouldn't have happened 5 or 10 years ago, that's the moment to see a naturopath, a Bredesen trained provider, and turn things around. A lot of people are past that, right? They're supporting a loved one with full-blown dementia. And the time to start is today, yesterday, and we want to be all in. So hopefully there's a capacity for that. To what we saw in the clinical trial, we took people with more mild cognitive impairment. There were some people included in the trial who had diagnosed Alzheimer's, but we know that at the MoCA is the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, a normal is 26 and above. So it's a one-page worksheet where you identify zoo animals, draw a clock, identify date and time, and it's out of 30. So perfect is 30, 26 and above is normal. And we took participants in our trial between 12 and 23. We have much more confidence that we're going to get them better. They're going to get better. They're going to be able to do the work to get better when they're 16, 17 and above. Once they drop down, it's so much more challenging. It takes more time and effort. So we want to start earlier. Now, that being said, we've seen patients with severe cognitive decline who have gotten better. So there's hope. It just is more challenging. It takes more effort. And we want to be more fully in. I see patients who kind of like dip their toe in the water. Maybe they do some of the testing, some of the changes. I just have less confidence. And when there's already progressed neurodegenerative disease, we really need to go for it. We need to be all in.
Love it. I've got a few rapid fire questions for you because I've read and people have said to me, what about X? What about Y? I heard this works. So I'm just going to kind of rapid fire and you let me know, is there research behind it? Do you see it work? That sort of thing. Essential fatty acids, omega-3s.
A critical foundational component of any brain healthy experience, right? Like that is on our list of the top 4 or 5 things we put everyone on.
And what dose?
We are looking for 5 to 6 grams of EPA DHA. DHA is most important for the brain, but I still like a mix. So 5 to 6 grams typically, and getting that number up if you're doing an omega check, getting that up to 8 to 10.
That's a high dose, 5,000, 6,000 milligrams a day. Okay. Huperzine A.
Yeah, part of a nootropic stack. I typically want to stack these things. There's a product called Qualiamine that I use a lot of. It was developed here in San Diego by some friends of mine. It's a very sophisticated formula that helps with the production of acetylcholine and dopamine. Also helps to make sure that you're getting good metabolism. So it's not just about increasing the neurotransmitters, but that you have good metabolism of them throughout the day. And so Huperzine A is in that stack. I think that's an important piece. It does help with acetylcholine. But you want to also have other things, I think, in that stack, not just one piece. They complement each other when you put the nootropics together. Lion's mane, choline, citicoline, the green coffee bean extract. There's a bunch of things that I think are really important.
Acetyl L-carnitine.
Yeah, great addition. And part of a nootropic stack again.
And what dose do you like on that? Because I've seen different doses used in clinical trials, not in Alzheimer's patients, but for cognition as an outcome.
Yeah, so all of these things are in the context of that individual. So if I have somebody with really high levels of mercury, I'm focused on the mercury, getting rid of the mercury first and getting rid of the infections first, getting them out of that fight and defend mode. And then we're adding nutrients, of course, but I'm not just gonna pick carnitine at high doses for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
If they have really low levels of carnitine on a nutrient, and like I use the Nutri-Eval, if they have really low levels, then we'll give them more, right? So we're kind of individualizing that sort of thing.
I love hearing that. A lot of people and a lot of doctors, unfortunately, as well, take a shotgun approach, or what I call a shotgun approach to it. They're just giving different bottles of nutrients, different doses, and they're seeing what changes and works, and not knowing if the person is actually deficient in that and needs more support. Not everybody, as you mentioned, needs L-carnitine,
Right.
so, or needs the same dose. So I love that personalized approach. Okay, let's switch gears a little off of nutrients. Types of exercise, resistance versus non-resistance or cardiac type exercise. Any benefit?
Yeah, so we need both. And I think the unique thing that I am a huge proponent of is dual task, is when you combine cognitive and physical exercise together, we see better outcomes cognitively. So this might be as simple as walking and talking. It might be listening to a podcast while you go for a run, but make sure you're not checking out, you're really engaged. It might mean going to a class where you're cued by an instructor and you have to stay cognitively engaged in order to, keep up with the class. It might be a dance class, it might be a yoga class, whatever it is. But that idea of dual task, I think, is where you get the most bang for your time. And then the other thing is with with cardio versus strength, we get different things out of them. Going back to the cardio and the connection between heart health and brain health, we got to keep blood flowing. We need to get blood to our brain, and getting cardiovascular exercise is a great way to do that. But we also need muscle, because muscle sends testosterone and BDNF, those signals to the brain for neurogenesis and synaptogenesis. So we need both. It's not, one is not at the exclusion of the other. But what I would love is if both of those are in a class setting or in a setting where you're getting that neurocognitive stimulation as well.
That's fascinating. I would not have thought of that combination giving better benefits. And this is a great segue then into my hormone question. Hormone replacement therapy with testosterone and estrogen.
Estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, pregnenolone, DHEA, yes. This is all a risk-benefit analysis that is important to do with a provider who you trust. I have seen, what it reminds me of is just like a wilted flower, and then these ladies, we get them on hormones, and they just like blossom and bloom again, and they feel like themselves. And they start sleeping with the progesterone. They're able to have sex with their partners because they don't have the vaginal atrophy anymore. And so much else happens too over time. The bone benefits. I'm a fan. I'm a naturopath, right? So when I was in training, I thought, oh, menopause is natural. It's normal. We all should go through that. Our hormones naturally fall. And now my clinical experience has been, oh my gosh, like so many women are suffering, they don't have to, and there are safe ways to use these hormones that make us feel and experience life in a more fulfilling way.
And it improves memory and cognition.
Yes, and the research is a little split, but that has been my clinical experience is consistent with that helping cognition, definitely.
Fantastic. You mentioned the keto diet. So quickly on diet, you got the different camps. I don't know if they're different camps, but there's the keto diet. And then the other one that I've read most about is the Mediterranean style diet.
Yeah.
So is there, everybody should be on the keto diet? It depends. How do you talk about this and think about it?
Yeah, so anyone with cognitive decline, I encourage them to experiment with a ketogenic diet and actually getting into ketosis, because flipping that metabolic switch tends to do some magic. There are people who, I mean, just this week talking to people in our coaching program, when I'm on a low carb ketogenic diet, my brain fog disappears and I remember words. We hear it over and over and over again. And so it's one of those tools that I don't want to leave it on the table, right? Like, let's put it to work. And it's not, I don't want anyone to be in ketosis forever. I highly recommend going back and forth between a ketogenic diet, maybe where you're having more animal protein, and then a plant-based diet. The consistent thing about ancestral diets was inconsistency, that we change it up, that our metabolism switches, and our bodies are these hybrid machines. And so why not use the other source of fuel and see how we do, see how we feel? Now, the other consistent thing about ancestral diets was there was no highly processed food. So that, I think, is my overarching number one recommendation, is to eliminate processed foods as much as possible. Now, I went through an airport yesterday and I had a bag of popcorn, right? Like you can't always avoid it. It's ubiquitous. And so do what you can when you can, but experimenting with getting in and out of ketosis, I think, is a worthy endeavor, and see how your brain and your body respond to that.
Your example of popcorn is perfect, because I want to briefly define for people what constitutes processed versus non-processed food. So if I were to take popcorn kernels and pop them in my house, to me, I don't, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't consider that processed food. I take other types of food, raw material, the food, and I cook it, and it gets transformed in some ways as it's being cooked. So how is it that you consider, and maybe you consider popcorn that I pop in my house as processed food too? How do you define that?
Yeah, are you familiar with the Nova system? There's a really
No.
great Brazilian um, researcher who basically described processed foods and broke them down into 4 different categories. And group 4 is the ultra processed. So like the popcorn I had yesterday was the smart corn. And there's cheese on it that's made of like maltodextrin. It is a highly processed thing that I wouldn't have maltodextrin in my pantry to make cheesy popcorn, right? Now, just cooking popcorn kernels over the stove, that is somewhat processed, right? It's kind of in this middle gray area. And so there's this NOVA classification system that is what I kind of look to. So examples of unprocessed or minimally processed foods. This is like taking an olive and eating it, taking a tomato, anything that came from the plant directly without processing. Then processed culinary ingredients. This might be dried spices, right? It's very similar to the plant, but there is some degree of processing. And then processed foods, something like butter or cheese. This is kind of minimally processed, but it's still a processed food. It's been around for millennia, maybe even like jam, something like that, bread, but that we made at home with flour and butter, like pancakes that we made with flour and butter and things in the pantry versus when you start adding guar gum and all of these words and things that we don't know what they mean, we would never have them in the pantry. That's, I think, where the big danger happens. And so, that I basically look at that NOVA system. There's a really fantastic book called Ultra Processed People that changed the way I eat and the way I shop and the way I think through that. And I think that the ketogenic diet, part of the benefit of getting into ketosis is that you eliminated pretty much all ultra processed foods.
God, what a great description. I've got to check that out. I'm not familiar. I have not read that book. I'm not familiar with the NOVA system, but I will. Let's talk about your book. It's coming out in June 2024. And I'm so excited. It's called Reversing Alzheimer's. And put that back up on the screen for me for just a sec. I want to make sure everybody, if you're looking on video, you can see that the new Reversing Alzheimer's, the new toolkit to improve cognition and protect brain health. Why should somebody buy your book?
So the reason we wrote it was because this can feel overwhelming, right? I've talked through a lot of things, and it's not a simple, easy, there's one pill or there's one IV to reverse Alzheimer's. I wish it were that simple. I would be telling everyone and shouting it from the rooftops if it were. And yet it is possible. And so it's a worthy endeavor to go through the process of saying, for me, what are the things that might be contributing and how can I optimize my lifestyle without even needing to see a doctor? How can I optimize the choices I'm making, what I put in my mouth, how much I exercise, how much I move, what time I go to bed, how I manage my stressors? How can I change my behavior so that I significantly shift the trajectory of my health as I age, particularly my brain health? And so that's what this does. We've coached over 200 people in online programs, and I've seen thousands of patients at this point. And then we've had our Marama residents for years, for the past 5 years. And so my goal is to was to synthesize all of that and give people the step-by-step kind of path. It's a toolkit, but it's also a journey to get on where we have reflection questions. How does this relate to me? What am I willing to do in each of these categories to optimize my brain health?
Reversing Alzheimer's by Dr. Heather Sandison, coming out by Harper, right? Harper
Yeah,
Collins.
HarperCollins has been
Yep.
very, very wonderful. It's such a gift to work with such a seasoned team over there. And it's available wherever you buy books and will ship on June 11th.
Wonderful. Everybody who's interested in that, make sure you get a copy of that. Can people work with you still? Are you seeing patients? How can they find out more? You mentioned something, I believe, about an online class. Tell me
Yeah, so
what's available.
we have several options. When you buy the book, you can go to reversingalzheimersbook.com, and we have a bunch of book bonus materials. So we've got a workbook that goes with it. We've got video summaries. And then if you want to level up from there, we have 12-week online coaching programs that we do as a group. So we create a community, which has been just incredible. It's been I get chills even talking about it. Last night we had our 12th session for one of the groups, and we invite people to come back because they add so much value after they've been through it. And they can kind of help the people that are coming behind them. And just hearing the stories, there was a woman who said, her mom had a feeding tube for 5 years, and she had dementia for 15 or 20. And it was just so heartbreaking. And there was no hope. There was no help for her. And it was so, so devastating for their family. And she was starting to suffer with brain fog. She's in her late 50s. She's raising kids. And she was just like the trauma and the stress that she was under because she felt like she was going down the path her mom had gone down. And in 12 weeks, her brain fog is gone. She's got more energy than she has in decades. She's sleeping better. And she doesn't have that fear anymore of Alzheimer's or of basically suffering the way that her mom did, or that her kids are going to have to go through the long goodbye that she had to go through. And it's just so incredible because she joined us from like the East Coast, and she was there inspired by and seeing the other people in the group get better. There was another gentleman who said his wife, she used to be like kind of glassed, that glassy look and when someone's kind of absent. And she's present now. She's asking her daughter, she'd gone up and been able to take the trip to Oregon to see her daughter from San Luis Obispo where they live. And now when she's back, she's calling her daughter and she's saying, hey, are the daffodils that we planted, are they blooming yet? And she's engaged. She's there. She's showing up. And it changes the quality of our relationships, which is ultimately what the quality of life comes down to.
I love it. Reversing Alzheimer's book.com.
ReversingAlzheimer'sBook.com is where you just put in your receipt number wherever you bought your book, save your receipt number, go back and grab that, and then plug in that, and you'll get access instantly to videos and a workbook that'll take you through the whole process, which is
I
a lot
love
of
it.
fun.
And is there another website where people can learn more about you?
Yeah, drheathersandison.com.
drheathersandison.com.
That's
Everybody
right.
go there. Thank you for your work, for sharing your time and knowledge, and for the impact you're making. Really appreciate it.
John, such a privilege to be here. Thank you for having me.